Play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to Saturday Morning Live with Esther and Phil, the dynamic duo, the husband and wife team. Now look, as shoplifting rockets, 8 million incidents in the last couple of years, it's doubled in the last 3 years, we'll be asking, is this desperate families trying to feed their family, or is it criminals using the cost of living as an excuse to steal?
We've done a poll about that, so that'd be interesting to get the results of that too. We're also going to be speaking almost 50 years on to the son of the first victim of the Yorkshire Ripper. We're going to be asking him why he doesn't think he should be called the Ripper, and also why we have such a fascination with serial killers.
And we've got friend of the show, Harry Redknapp, coming on to give us all the latest on the football news. I know you're interested in that.
I want to know what he thinks about Neil Warnock, who's just ended as Huddersfield Town's manager, aged 74.
And I want to know about the London Derby.
Yeah. And also on today's show, we're going to be discussing the Nanny State. Do we have the middle classes telling the working classes what they should and shouldn't do because they can't be trusted to make decisions for themselves?
I think
we're having
we
a debate with Dan Hodges and Matthew Stadlin. And of course, we want to know what you think about all of these things, so please join in the conversation. Email us gbviews@gbnews.com. But before all of that, here's the headlines with the wonderful Aaron.
Very good morning to you. It's a minute past 10, Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. Russell Brand's broken his silence by accusing the government of working with big tech to censor his online content. In a video released last night, the comedian thanked his supporters after an extraordinary and distressing week. He claims moves to demonetise his social media content occurred in the context of the online safety bill. It comes after allegations of sexual assault were made against him following a joint investigation by Channel 4, The Times and The Sunday Times, claims Mr Brand has denied. Boris Johnson's warned Rishi Sunak against delivering a mutilated version of HS2. The former Prime Minister says suggestions the high-speed rail link could be curtailed over cost concerns were the height of insanity and desperate Treasury-driven nonsense. Well, the government's refused to deny reports claiming the Birmingham to Manchester route will be scrapped. David Cameron's also privately raised significant concerns, that's according to reports in The Times, which claims there are also questions over another northern section to East Midlands Parkway near Nottingham. Shadow Secretary of State Annalise Dodds says the train needs to stay on the tracks.
This was a major plank of the government's claims around levelling up. There's been speculation, in fact, over the last 13 years, including just the last few days around these projects. That's not the way to be delivering that kind of infrastructure. And Labour would have a very different approach. We would make sure not only that we sped up infrastructure projects, but that we then didn't have this kind of speculation and instability, because it's causing huge, huge issues for our country's reputation.
Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak's considering plans that would effectively ban cigarettes for the next generation. It would entail steadily increasing the legal age for consuming tobacco as has been reported in The Guardian. If implemented by 2026, it would mean anyone aged 15 and under now would never be able to buy a cigarette. Smoking costs society in the UK £17 billion, according to government research, with £2.4 billion alone to the NHS. And ministers are also understood to be drawing up plans to ban disposable vapes. Humans could lose control to machines because artificial intelligence is developing too fast for regulators to keep up. That's the view of the Deputy Prime Minister, who urged world leaders to recognise the threat of AI in a speech at the UN General Assembly in New York. Oliver Dowden says the government will push to create an international regulatory body when the UK hosts an AI safety summit at Bletchley Park in November in an effort to protect humanity's future.
AI revolution will be a bracing test for the multilateral system to show that it can work together on a question that will define the fate of humanity. Our future, humanity's future, our entire planet's future depends on our ability to do so. That is our challenge, and this is our opportunity to be truly the United Nations.
The Liberal Democrats are set to launch proposals to improve education and ease the cost of childcare. It would include £390 million to introduce permanent tutoring to help small groups of pupils who've fallen behind in class. They say that would support about 1.75 million children. They're also expected to outline new plans to make childcare flexible, affordable and fair at their conference. Wendy Chamberlain says the Lib Dems are dedicated to supporting struggling families.
We want to spend the right money on services and we want to deliver for local communities, but we want to potentially do different things, and that is what differentiates us as a party. And I'm pretty confident there's a number of dividing lines. I think during cost of living crisis, I think people really appreciate that, and I think that's what we have to do as politicians. We are responsible for rebuilding that trust because nobody else is going to do it.
A study looking at the health impact of long COVID has found nearly a third of patients have suffered long-term organ damage. According to the findings, abnormalities in the lungs were almost 14 times higher in those who'd had the virus. Abnormal findings involving the brain and kidneys were 3 and 2 times higher, respectively. The extent of the damage was often influenced by the severity of the infection, their age and other diseases in the body. And Joe Biden's announced a new office dedicated solely to tackling gun violence in America. It's the latest move by the US president to prevent mass shootings. He's previously used executive orders to regulate homemade firearms, to tighten background checks and strengthen mental health programs. The new Office of Gun Violence Prevention will be overseen by the Vice President, Kamala Harris. This is GB News in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker too. That's it from me. Now back to Esther and Phil.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Now, Britain's shoplifting epidemic could lead to businesses closing. Experts have warned shop thefts have more than doubled in the past 3 years, costing retailers nearly £1 billion a year.
Well, are we taking this seriously enough? Joining us now to discuss this is Ryan Mark Parsons. Ryan, so here we have it. Some people are saying it's desperate families needing to get food for the families, and other people are saying, no, it's not. The criminals, they're stealing things, making an excuse for themselves because of the cost of living. So which is it?
Well, I think I agree with the other people. I don't really have any sympathy towards crime. I think it is really categorically people committing crime. And I think if there's a general acceptance of that, I think that's a really slippery slope. And I think then you start to normalize shoplifting, and then you'll see a prevalence of it in swathes across the UK. And I know that businesses are suffering. For example, John Lewis, they had a £12 million stock shrinkage, and that's mainly because of shoplifting. And then when these businesses start to suffer, it then hits the employees. So then everyone working for these shops, businesses have to close down. That means then they lose their jobs, and then they might be in a position where they feel like. So I think it always does have an effect.
Yeah, well, we were just watching shocking video footage there of people just hoovering up shop shelves. It's not like they're trying to feed the family. They were just taking all they possibly could. I have to tell you, our poll has said 88% said it's criminals. They are criminals. Only 12% thought it was desperate families.
Yeah. Ryan, Mark, who do you think's to blame for this sort of acceptance of shoplifting? Is it the retailers themselves? Is it the police? Is it the government? Is it society? Who do you pin the blame on for this?
Well, I mean, you've got to naturally blame the criminals that are doing this. I mean, I think it's really opportunistic crime. I've been seeing that video that's being played now of the thugs leaving from the DVD van. About 3 weeks ago, and the poor DVD delivery driver suffered a heart attack, died on the scene because these criminals have decided to rob his phone and probably the contents of his van, and I think it's despicable.
To say the sound to you at the moment, Ryan, isn't great. So what we'll do is we'll bring this debate back into the studio because we can hardly hear you there. You're cutting in and out.
Norman Collier.
It certainly was. But we've got your point. This is criminality. It is theft. It should not be accepted or acceptable. So let's go back into the studio here, and we've got former Labour Party advisor Matthew Lazar and Conservative commentator Alex Dean. So let's just carry on there. I mean, daylight robbery, the blatancy of it is shocking.
Absolutely.
And that's what I can't get over, how blatant it is.
Yeah, I mean, look, clearly some families are struggling at the moment, which is why we've seen food bank use go up. But it's not families sweeping through the back of delivery vans. You know, who knows what they're getting? One rather hopes they're getting some rather dull books and not the electronics that they hope for. But, you know, it's all part of this feeling I think we've got in the country at the moment that things are going the wrong way, the rules people aren't sticking by the rules. And so, you know, it's the old broken window theory, isn't it? If you attend to the broken window, which they did in New York when they sorted crime out, then the bigger crimes, it all follows through, and you create a culture where people get held responsible for their actions.
I guess, Alex, the police will say they're overstretched. They can't investigate every single shoplifting incident because they haven't got enough resources.
There's some truth to that, and that's why our police have been retasked, so no longer having to spend hours at a time with people on mental health call-outs, staying shift after shift in hospitals and so forth. It's not that doesn't need doing by the state, it doesn't need doing by a warranted police officer, and they've got their priorities wrong. They shouldn't be going out and knocking on people's doors for non-crime events like tweets that they don't like. And if you stop that sort of duty, then you might free up some police time. But I think Matthew's put his finger on it about this kind of shoplifting behaviour. It's blatant, and it's shared on social media for clout, for likes. The kind of people...
And they're then saying, oh, everybody can do it. It's all right, we're normalising it. If we're doing it, you can do it. All come out in force.
Actively encouraging it. And now, I really feel for any family that's struggling to put food on the table. But I imagine if there is a mother or father out stealing food for their children, they feel a certain sense of shame, knowing they're doing something wrong, and they try to hide it when they do it. They are not the gangs you're talking about and showing on these awful footage pieces.
All young men, able-bodied, looking like they could certainly go out and work.
They don't look like they've got children yet.
No, and when you've got things, high-value stock, not on the shelves, and when they say high-value stock is something like coffee, steak and Lurpak, there is a problem. But what's your first story?
So, my first story is the big dilemma which we heard about in the news that's facing the government, and indeed facing the opposition in terms of what policy stance they take, which is HS2. We feel like we've been talking about HS2 forever because we've been building it forever, and whilst it's been building and stopping and starting, the bill has been going up. So it looks today like Rishi Sunak wants to cancel it at last, bite the bullet, as some would say, but others would say that this is a betrayal of the North, it's a betrayal of the levelling up agenda, which Boris Johnson won all those new seats in the so-called Red Wall with at the last election. So Boris has been adamant from outside, no, keep going, it's a betrayal of what he stood for. Michael Gove's backing him in the Cabinet, but Rishi looks like he's backing the Treasury. Will a decision be taken?
I love the way it's people in the South telling the North what they want, and actually it was never HS2, it was actually connecting the great northern cities.
HS3.
So we are a powerhouse, and giving us public transport on the ground and reliable broadband.
It's worth being specific because some people will be very excited on both sides of the debate by what Matthew said about scrapping HS2. That is not what I understand the discussion to be. It's about Birmingham to Manchester. That piece
I should have said the second half.
That piece of
only because they can't stop the rest yet. That's only why.
Well, it's not the bottom
if
bit.
they could have, they would have.
One of the most interesting things I think about this is the way that it's dividing people within parties. This is a policy discussion that absolutely divides Conservative and Conservative. So you see Rishi Sunak supposedly going in one direction here, and two of his more prominent recent predecessors, Boris Johnson and David Cameron, going in the other direction.
Yeah, like I said, Southerners telling the Northerners what to do. I think you just said
Do you think, Alex, that this is? I mean, it seems that Rishi's had his Weetabix in the last week or so, doesn't it? In terms
and many of them. Many of them.
Spinach too.
But I just wondered, he's sort of finding a dividing line with Labour. But the interesting subplot to me, and I just wonder what you thought, was the dividing lines he's finding with Boris Johnson here, and that. Over net zero and now HS2, those people who, the right wing of the Conservative Party used to say that Boris was sort of the second coming for true conservatism, seems to have got a bit quiet all of a sudden as Boris is now sort of exposing himself as the socialist that many of us saw all along.
I've always thought that Rishi Sunak is quite significantly to the right of Boris Johnson, just in terms of their beliefs and ideology. And it's not a criticism or praise for either of them necessarily. Boris's greatest quality for me as a Conservative was that he was a proven election winner. But plainly, he's a big state person. He believes in massive market interventions, and he's very much on the left and liberal values in lots of ways. So what you're seeing now, I think, is the real Sunak, who, by the way, for a Yorkshire seat, might be considered to be quite northern.
It is. That's right. That's what we're saying. We're putting him in the north.
Where does this leave Labour, Matthew? Because did they prefer the previous sort of more cautious Rishi Sunak to fight against, or are they nervous about this new sort of supercharged Rishi Sunak?
Yeah, I think that the HS2 is interesting for Labour specifically because it's got we saw on Monday the Northern mayors coming out and saying, you've got to build it all the way to Manchester and then beyond. And I think the mayors are going to be, if Keir does win, I think the mayors are going to be a big issue for Labour because they've got this strong alternative power base. In terms of what would Labour
I think
prefer,
Tracy Brabin as well. She's looking at sort of referendums to go net zero or being able to be devolved for certain areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Zero.
Once they've got it, they want more. Yeah, once they've got power, they want more power. In terms of whether they want Rishi on his Weetabix or sort of a bland Rishi, I think it depends because on some issues like this, it will clearly that Labour will be able to play this as an anti-Northern thing, and just weird politics to do this when the Tories are about to meet in Manchester to say we're not going to be bringing you your fancy
No, but they're
line.
going to be doing what nobody was delivering, a proper, and this is what they've got to do, a proper Northern powerhouse. That's what the North want. Your story, Alex.
I've gone inside the Telegraph. Toby Harnden on page 16 has got a really good long read asking openly the questions that have been asked privately for some time. Is Joe Biden really up to a second term? Now, let's be clear. I think Joe Biden's a decent man who would have made a very good president of the United States, just not now. And I think his decline in office...
What, 40, 50 years ago?
Well, certainly when he first tried, whatever, in the 70s, he might have been...
Yes, about 40, 50 years ago.
But it's worth bearing in mind that when Joe Biden, the first day he took office, at age 78, he was older than the last occupant of the office, Ronald Reagan, when he left office at 77. And I just think that his decline in office has been palpable. And indeed, within the Democratic Party, the debate is now, what do they do? So a poll, this is the reason that's prompted this story, a poll has found 2/3 of registered Democrats believe Joe Biden is too old to seek a second term as president after his increasingly rambling. I know, and I don't know what the other third is smoking, but I think the other big risk cul-de-sac they've got themselves into is that despite all the challenges and problems for Joe Biden, his vice president Kamala Harris is polling even worse. So what you would normally think of as the obvious solution is not one.
Phil, have you got one of your stories?
Well, I just wonder, what do you think? I mean, there's no chance Biden's going to be the Democratic candidate, is there?
I think it's looking increasingly unlikely. Michelle Obama is the potential.
I've said this ages ago.
As a kind of compromise candidate, wouldn't have to have the primaries. Nobody could object to Michelle, and that would solve the problem.
I've said this ages ago. I think she's always wanted to do it. I think she felt when her husband got it, because she was always the one who thought she was academically more superior, better communicator. I think she's always thought she should have done it.
Do you think we have the opposite problem here, which is we have politicians who are too young? Because apparently the Tories want to weaponise Keir Starmer's age, and he's merely 59, I think.
God, if
you do have the very small problem. Michelle Obama has repeatedly said emphatically she doesn't want to do it. I mean, you'd have to get past
No, but obviously if everybody begged her to do it, if everybody begged her to, she'd be doing a duty
to
the nation and the party.
Bill?
Daily Star, page 18. This is one for you, Esther, actually.
Thank you very much.
The headline is Full Scouse over bingo. Apparently, Scousers are the biggest bingo fans in Britain. More than 1 in 5 Liverpudlians love playing the game. Dundee, Lincoln and Blackburn were next, according to casino.co.uk. I'm a big bingo fan.
I was going to say, that's what brought us together. You love calling out the numbers.
Yeah, I do.
And I'm quite happy to sit and with my dabbers.
Does he have a sparkly jacket?
And dab it. Yes.
Do you like getting your dabber out, Alex?
I quite enjoy a flutter. I'm not a massive bingo fan, but I do enjoy a little bet from time to time.
Give us a couple of your little lingos.
The thing is, bingo's gone politically correct, Matthew. Did you know?
No, I didn't.
Name more two fat ladies.
Don't blame me.
There's no two fat ladies or any of that, you know, Kelly's Eye, number 1, or Legs 11, or anything like that. All of that's gone out. They now just read the numbers out.
Really? All the fun's gone out of it?
Exactly.
That's a shame.
Isn't that terrible?
When you do it, do you still...
I still do, you know,
uncensored.
He's allowed
5 and 9, the Brighton line. And the thing is, I remember when I worked for Asda, we used to have a Christmas party for pensioners, a Christmas lunch for them, and we used to have a game of bingo. We used to have a game of bingo afterwards.
He was being served, not served.
The secret to getting them all going at the bingo is after you've read out about 5 or 6 numbers and they're all waiting for the 4 corners or what I know, or a line or whatever, is to say anybody sweating.
That's the line. Anybody sweating.
Because usually somebody's sweating over.
Phil Davis is available for bookings.
Exactly, absolutely.
Christmas is coming
up. You can't beat a good game of bingo.
We do a dry run before Christmas, so that on Christmas Day he's got it all sorted.
That's brilliant.
Got his little outfit on for this Christmas. We'll all be there as a family.
I hope we're going to see pictures.
I'm telling you, pictures to behold.
Wow.
You two are staying with us, but coming up, during the 70s, serial killer Peter Sutcliffe stalked the streets of West Yorkshire. As a new drama about this starts tomorrow, we'll be speaking to his first victim's son, Richard McCann. That in just a few moments.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30am.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Saturday Morning Live with Esther and Phil. It is 10:24. Now, during the 70s, serial killer Peter Sutcliffe stalked the streets of West Yorkshire and across the north. Now a 7-part ITV drama will detail the chase to hunt down one of Britain's most notorious killers.
Well, we're now joined by Richard McCann, the son of Peter Sutcliffe's first murder victim. That was Wilma McCann. Thank you so much indeed for joining us today. Now, the drama series is going to be called The Long Shadow. And what I wonder, you were only 5 when your mum was murdered. Did it cast a long shadow over your life? And the way your mum was portrayed, did it cast a long shadow? Is this an apt name for the series?
Well, I never thought about the relationship with my mum and how she was described, but it's certainly, on reflection now all these years, 48 years later, it has cast a shadow, and I guess the impact of what he did all those years ago is still being felt, not just by me and my family, but I guess all the families, and not just the families involved, the people of West Yorkshire.
Yeah, but it was a week before your 6th birthday, and it had long-term effects on your sister.
It did. It affected us all, but, you know, 13 years ago, she sadly, tragically took her life, and, you know, arguably, we can put that down to what happened that fateful night and the years that followed. You know, the stigma that came with it. There's lots of levels to this, but absolutely that is part of that long shadow.
And they sort of said, oh, these women, they were women of the night and they were going out. And for you to read that about your mum, who was brutally murdered, let's not forget it.
Yeah, that created this shame. I was ashamed of mum. I was actually ashamed of the picture that they used, a black and white picture, which reminded me of Myra Hindley. It was a mugshot of her when she was 18. So that stuck with me for many, many years, and you know, I was really happy and grateful that finally we got the apology from West Yorkshire Police for the language that was used all those years ago. So yeah, I mean, and that stuck with me. It's like in my DNA, I suppose, which I try and manage as best I can, but it's still there.
Now, you've been very outspoken that you don't think that Peter Sutcliffe should be described as the Yorkshire Ripper, which is obviously what he's become known as. Why do you feel so strongly about that, Richard?
Well, first of all, even as you say that moniker, or use those words, it triggers me a little bit, because if you think about what that word is describing, so it's a triggering word, so I don't like that. But if you think about that, what it did back then, the press and the police, and they still do call him that name, it almost makes him out to be something that is actually not, this mystical figure. And so when they're faced with, or when they were faced with this mildly mannered, softly spoken individual, it was miles away from what the press had conjured up, this being. And also, I think it kind of derailed the investigation, because calling him that inspired John Humble, who took the letters that the police back in the Victorian times, the Jack they used. They were sent letters. He modelled his letters on that, and that actually cost women their lives towards the end of the investigation, because they're looking for this Geordie hoaxer. Anyway, we could talk all day about that, but there's lots of reasons why I don't like that.
You're speaking at the Leeds International Festival of Ideas next week about obsession with true crime and things like that. Why do you think that we have such a fascination with serial killers in the way that we do? And do you think that we spend too much time focusing on them rather than on their victims?
I think we do, on the whole, although the drama that starts on Monday, The Long Shadow, is the opposite, because he features not until the very end. This is about the families involved. I'm not sure whether we've got an obsession. If I'm honest with you, I watch true crime programmes. I don't know if it's because I've been affected by Mum's death and I want to see the perpetrators brought to book, but I'm not sure whether we've got an obsession. Yeah, but I do think people are fascinated in what brings people to carry out those crimes.
But like you said, in the space of 5 years, he murdered 13 women and he attempted to murder another 7. And is it about time that those women's stories were heard?
Absolutely. You know, for many, many years, there were just black and white pictures. There were numbers, there were names, and that was it. And these are, or were, mothers, sisters, daughters, aunts, and I think what you're going to see in the ITV drama is the bigger picture, and it humanises them. That's what it does, and it was absolutely fantastic to watch.
I remember growing up myself, and this was happening, that I remember how it impacted my life. You'd make sure you weren't walking on the streets alone, you know, getting a bus home as a kid, what was going to happen, and it did prey on my mind. But as for you, have you spent your whole life worried about these kind of attacks?
Not my whole life, but my childhood, before he was arrested. When he killed Jane MacDonald, apparently the first innocent, they're all innocent, of course, when she was killed, she lived 6 houses from where we lived with my mum. She babysat for us, not the night Mum died. When he killed her, I thought, he's going to kill me. And I lived in fear for a number of years. And then eventually we had the hoax tapes, this Geordie voice. I was listening out for this voice. When he was arrested, obviously, I didn't fear that. But, of course, these things do impact on you, and I've got children of my own now, so I fear for them and I fear about what goes on in the world. So, yeah, but the initial fear was ended when he was arrested.
That's good to hear, because I felt that. I still feel that, you know, because you don't know, it's the worst thing that could possibly happen and you just wouldn't know. So I could imagine you living with that fear.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, as being a parent now, I mean, we all worry, don't we, as parents, of what might happen.
I mean, I remember growing up in Yorkshire at the time, everyone was petrified. I mean, it's difficult to overstate how worried people were in Yorkshire about, you know, how dangerous it was to go out at night. And it wasn't, even not just for women, people were genuinely scared. I just wonder, how do you feel watching these things now? You know, if you're watching a drama about Peter Sutcliffe or even other true crime things, how does it make you feel when you watch these things?
Well, generally speaking, I want to empathise with the families, the victims. That's what I experience when I watch these things. But I don't think we've seen many dramatisations of Peter Sutcliffe. I think there was one 2000, I think it was. I didn't watch that, but I watched this one, and when I saw it, I was gobsmacked at the accuracy of what took place. In my case, in particular, they've got it down to a T, and I think they're doing a really great job.
Did they get in touch with you? And did they say, how would you like to see your mum portrayed, or what don't you want to hear?
We had a general conversation.
Did you have?
I mean, it was obvious where they were heading with this in the first instance, that they were going to do this sensitively. And they have done that, a fantastic job of that. And they've portrayed my mum in particular as this loving mum, and I don't know if you've seen it, but putting us to bed. But yeah, so they've done a great job. What I did ask them to do, or invite them to do, was to not use the R word, the moniker, in the title, and I was really pleased to see that they did that. What I've been less pleased with is, over the last few weeks, where we've had lots of publicity about it, all the tabloids, they're all using this moniker. Once and for all, can't we stop that? Jacqueline Hill's mother, 42 years ago, asked the press, stop using that moniker. It somehow creates something that he isn't. He's a monster, and uses...
You want his name used. Some people might say, we don't want to ever hear his name again, we don't want to give him fame, but it pushes us to now use his name, Peter Sutcliffe, and show his face. But you'd say you'd sooner everybody know how evil he is, not use a sort of, as you say, a moniker or whatever.
Yeah. Not just him, all of them. I mean, I believe he inspired Stephen Griffiths, in the killer in Bradford, who, when he went to court, he was asked by the judge, what's your name? And he didn't say Stephen Griffiths. He said, I am the crossbow. I won't even say the second word because it's too triggering. But he was inspired by Peter Sutcliffe. He had a book on him in his flat when he was arrested. So I think I mean, is it too much to ask to stop using these insensitive names?
No, it's not, and you're right to.
And I just wondered, Richard, there was obviously a lot of criticism at the time of the West Yorkshire Police handling of the case and how long it took to bring Peter Sutcliffe to justice. They interviewed him, I think, 8 or 9 times before they finally got him for good. Do you feel sort of any bitterness about how badly West Yorkshire Police handled that inquiry, or are you understanding of how difficult it was for them at the time?
I mean, they made mistakes. We know that. It's been well documented. I don't think there's anything to be gained by repeatedly pointing the finger at them for making those mistakes. And I think, including the language that was used, I think we've learned. I would hope that they've learned. But I have to say, and it comes through in the drama, the misogyny that took place all those years ago, which impacted on that investigation, is still being felt today. So I'm really grateful that they're visiting this series of events through that misogynistic lens to bring it to our attention, because it still happens.
Richard McCann, thank you so much for coming in today, and I will be watching that drama series and thinking of you and your mum.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, coming up with new ULEZ measures, bans on vapes and affordability checks on gambling, are the political class punishing the working class? We'll be debating that in a few moments with Dan Hodges and Matthew Stadlen. But first, here's the all-important weather.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Good looking day out there today. It's a bit chilly out there first thing this morning. Tomorrow it's going to turn windier and particularly in the west, quite a lot wetter. It's not completely dry this morning. 1 or 2 showers just grazing eastern England and across the Northern Isles, where it's still quite blustery too. But the winds will ease down a little through the day and the showers in the east should clear. For the vast majority, it is fine. Dry, bright, with some sunshine, albeit that sunshine turning hazy for Wales and Northern Ireland, with some rain coming into Northern Ireland later on. Temperatures recovering after that chilly start by this afternoon into the teens, maybe the high teens in the south. The wet weather, though, will push into Northern Ireland and then into parts of Scotland during this evening and then into Wales as well, and likely to linger in parts of the west through the night and indeed for much of Sunday. The rain doesn't really get into the Midlands or southern parts of England, generally staying dry here, and it won't be as cold tonight as the night just gone because there's more cloud and the winds will be picking up. So Sunday sees further rain at times, parts of northwest England and especially parts of Scotland looking soggy, where we do have Met Office yellow warnings in place, but also parts of North Wales, Northern Ireland could see pretty heavy and persistent rain for most of tomorrow afternoon. Patchy rain further south, and many central and eastern parts will again just be dry and bright tomorrow. It will be windier, but it's also going to be warmer with temperatures in the high teens or maybe 20 degrees.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows,
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Saturday Morning Live with Esther and Phil. It's now 10:39.
Well, there's no better person to tackle the latest football stories than friend of the show and former Premier League manager Harry Redknapp. Harry, thanks for joining us this morning. Fresh from your success last week, tipping the winner of the St Ledger.
You've both been living off that all week, that win.
We need to set up our own tipping service, I think, Harry. We could call
We can do it.
We could call it Phil Nap or something like that for best.
You often are.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, what I wanted to ask you about, Harry, today was about Neil Warnock, who's stepped down as Huddersfield Town manager, age 74, after saving them from relegation last season and all the rest of it. What makes Neil Warnock such an enduringly successful manager?
Well, I think actually his age is going down every year. Last year he was 76. I don't know how he suddenly becomes 74, but apart from all that, Neil's a good lad. I like Neil as a character. He keeps it simple. I think he knows the game. I don't think he's particularly out there on the training ground coaching every day. I think he leaves that to other people. He just understands the game, comes in on, picks the right teams, knows the player, and talks a bit of common sense.
Is the way that you manage players, I mean, it seems to be in the workplace generally, how you manage people today is very different to how you'd manage people 30 years ago. You know, you couldn't get away today in the office with the Alex Ferguson hairdryer treatment.
No.
Is it? I mean, is that the same in football?
Are you trying to say has football gone woke?
Well, I just wanted to know: is it just can you manage people in a football team the same way that you maybe could 30 years ago?
Phil, no, definitely not. Definitely not. Back in them days, they were all like the players, all British players, and they'd grown up with that type of behaviour. You know, people, if they weren't performing, people shouting at them and giving them some or whatever. But nowadays, I think with the foreign players that have come in, they can't accept that type of treatment, and it doesn't happen anymore. You wouldn't get away with it now. And even so, I think you come in at half-time. It's not a time to be shouting. You need to talk about what's gone wrong or what's gone right, and you have that short 10-minute spell to get your point over. It's not a time to shout and scream at players. And I have found over the years that you don't improve their performances by shouting and screaming at people. It only makes it worse normally.
So as you got older as a manager, did you stop shouting then? Did you think yourself, look, this isn't working?
No, I did stop. I mean, I never was much. I never was. I would never say I was a bully or went in shouting and screaming at people that much. Certain times, listen, you can't keep saying, well done, lads, we've just lost 6-0, you played fantastic today. You know, you have to tell it as it is, and you can't keep coddling them, but you do get more out of people by telling them what they're doing and what they can do and what they can't do. No. And I think Neil, I think he lives in Cornwall. I mean, he still managed Huddersfield. So I think he probably came in 2 or 3 days a week, left it to the coaches, came in on the important days. He'd be there probably Thursday, Friday, Saturday for the game, go home Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, maybe come back again Wednesday. But he understands the game, knows the player, knows where to get a player from if he needs one. It's just a sensible football man, really.
Now, there's another disadvantage of having all these foreign players, Harry, because I was reading this week that the Brazilian player Sandro said that Spurs lost a match to Fulham 4-0 when you were the manager because he couldn't understand your instructions to him. Was that a regular problem when you were managing these foreign players?
I don't think that was the reason we lost. We didn't lose that many at Tottenham, Phil, as you remember, but Sandro was enough. He was a cake. The only words that Sandro knew, he went to play darts with Bobby George. I don't remember Bobby George had all the chains around, a real character, and he took Sandro to teach him how to play darts. And he said, when you get the treble, you say lovely jubbly. So when he came in next day, all day he kept, all we got out of it was lovely jubbly. Other than that, I think he went back to Brazil not speaking any more English than when he arrived. But he was a great character.
Harry, one final quick answer here. There's the North London derby, and your predictions are going well, following on from last week. Who's going to win?
Oh, my God. Oh, don't. I can't win with this one. Obviously, I want Spurs to win. But I have got a feeling Arsenal are very, very, very good. I think Arsenal, Liverpool are the only dangers this year to Man City. I take a draw as a Spurs, but if I had to put my life on it, I think Arsenal are going to be very difficult to beat.
Oh, there you go. Thank you very much indeed for joining us again today. Thank you. Brighten up our day.
Yeah.
Now, look, a couple of views here coming in because we were talking about shoplifting and how it's rocketed. And we were saying, gosh, is this desperate families trying to feed the family, or is it criminality? We did a poll. 88% of you said it was criminality. Lee here saying shoplifting is a major crime now because of red tape, weak, woke policing, too scared to arrest people for being called sexist, racist, all those things. It's a soft justice system and soft justice. Lee, you didn't hold back there.
Diana says it's nothing short of organised crime. Anyone in poverty can go to a food bank. There is no excuse for theft. And Keith says this shoplifting epidemic is criminal and should be treated as such by the police. It's one step away from anarchy, and the government are doing nothing as usual because they're totally tunnel-visioned and obsessed with net zero.
And I'll just read...
slightly less obsessed with net zero than they were a week ago.
I'll just read this final one here. Loads of views coming in. But Anna said a convenience shop in Doncaster dismissed a member of staff who tackled a shoplifter as she put herself in harm's way at work. Couldn't believe that, could you? The person who tried to stop the shoplifter, the member of staff, ended up getting dismissed. Now, that is plain wrong.
Absolutely. Tell us what you think. GBviews at gbnews.com. Now, a new range of policies set to be introduced could have a significant impact on people's lives. This includes the extension of ULEZ, a proposed ban on disposable vapes, and affordability checks on your gambling.
These policies will particularly affect the working class, who will disproportionately face the consequences. So, are these policies an attack on the working class? Joining us now to discuss this is columnist for The Mail on Sunday, Dan Hodges, and political commentator and writer Matt Stadland. So I'm going to start with you, Dan, because you wrote a fabulous article talking about this, saying really it was the political class, really, like in a paternalistic way, and both of the parties, the two main parties, doing it, and it was an attack on the working class. So why do you feel this?
Well, because it's something that we've sort of seen, we see consistently in our politics, as you said, from both sides. It's sort of what I call this form of missionary politics, where primarily middle-class politicians, middle-class think tanks, basically prescribe to the working class and working people what is in their best interests from the middle-class perspective. And you've listed them there. We're going to have, people are going to be asked, can they afford to gamble? People are going to be stopped from vaping. We've got reports today that there's going to be a significant, maybe a complete smoking ban. Obviously, people are going to be prevented from driving to help the environment. But every time you see this policy agenda put forward, it is always aimed and targeted at working people. So there is no, as far as I'm aware, a sort of big government agenda at the moment to crack down on middle-class drug use and drug addiction. There's no programme to crack down on middle-class drinking. We had the expansion of ULEZ in obviously here in London, where people driving cars, what was it, older than sort of, was it 2015, basically had to give them up. Over the same period, the number of private jets flying into Britain and London increased by 75%.
So
it's the focus that I think is my concern.
Is that because the working class are too thick to understand, can't be trusted to do stuff? I mean, they don't think they know what's going on?
I think there are two things that underpin this. I think one is that we cannot. I mean, let's be honest about this. I think part of the strategy is if we give working people the facts, they will be too stupid to understand them. So we have to do what is in their best interest on their behalf. And the second thing is, if we give them choices, they will, in our view, take the wrong choices, so we'll take the choices for them.
What do you think of that, Matthew? Do you have any sympathy for what Dan's saying, that this is sort of, in fact, middle-class people telling working-class people what's in their best interests, because working-class people clearly can't be trusted to decide for themselves?
I hope that Dan is wrong. I hope that we don't have a bunch of middle-class politicians sitting down round the cabinet table and saying, how can we hammer the working classes? But there's a little bit of truth in what Dan says. I think it's almost sort of conspiracist to suggest that politicians are specifically targeting the great working communities of Britain and trying to make their lives less enjoyable. A little bit of truth here and there, though. Just, for example, with middle-class drug users. I mean, take my street in West London as an example. You've got middle class, if we're going to use that term, but let's say affluent, well-off people taking cocaine or whatever else it is. And then we've got people who you might traditionally have described as working class, some of whom are probably dealing the drugs. I mean, I've seen it, both things, with my own eyes. Who are the people who end up paying the penalty? Unless you become addicted, of course, to something like cocaine, and then you're paying your own penalty.
But I think what Dan's saying, but you've seen the focus on banning vaping, and what flavours should people be allowed to have, instead of saying, do you know what, cocaine, let's get shot.
Yeah, so just to finish the drugs point, I think there should be a much bigger focus on affluent people taking the drugs, creating, as it were, the demand, rather than just going after the suppliers, because otherwise you do have people who are on very low incomes taking the brunt of it. On vaping, it's obviously not just working class people who vape. Vaping broadly, we've been told, has been a good thing because it stops people, helps stop people smoking. But who vapes? Middle class people, rich people, poorer people. And if it is seen that this is a danger and we don't want kids to get hooked on different flavours, then banning those disposable things might be a good thing. I don't think it's targeting working class people.
Political era, and somebody like Thatcher would have talked about personal responsibility, not the paternalistic state, whether that is the Labour Party or the Conservative, making excuses for you or telling you what to do. So why don't we go back to...
Well, and Tony Blair. I mean, Tony Blair introduced the Gambling Act in 2005, which was very liberating. We seem to have gone from a sort of a political consensus of individual responsibility to a consensus of the nanny state. And
the nanny state, I've been in politics, you know, commenting on it and working it for 20 years. The nanny state has reared its head from time to time. I'll ask you guys, do you think we should legalise drugs? I don't. That's about personal responsibility, you could argue. Should we be saying to people, if you want to do coke, if you want to smoke marijuana,
that's between legality and non-legality, and I don't.
But you could make it legal, Esther. You could make it legal.
Medicalise it, and you'll put it on the NHS. We did that debate last week. But where do we go from here? How do we treat people as grown-ups rather than being this sort of paternalistic, statist political class?
I think the first thing we need to do is we need to understand what the reality of public policy is. I mean, Matthew said he doesn't believe that working people are being targeted, but they are specifically being targeted. I mean, let's look at two examples. One, if you look at road pricing, right, which Sadiq Khan says he wants to pursue, and politicians of all persuasions actually say they want to look at. What are we actually talking about with road pricing? We are literally talking about introducing artificial pricing, which means that those on lower incomes cannot afford to drive, and we therefore leave the roads as the preserve of those who can afford it, a rich elite. look at the gambling policy. We've got a situation now where the government is talking about introducing legislation that will say specifically to working class gamblers, you will have to demonstrate you can afford to gamble. Now, if somebody goes into a shop and says, I don't know, I want to buy a new Burberry jacket or a new pair of Louboutin shoes, or I want to buy a Rolls Royce, is the state going to expensive restaurant? Is the state going to say, well, I'm afraid before you do that, we're going to check if you can afford it? No, because that would involve creating an imposition on people on middle classes, on the middle classes, and primarily middle class politicians don't want to do that.
Just two things on that. First of all, the science is real. Dan and I both agree that climate change is happening and it's man-made. The question is, how do we combat it? We have to try to combat it in an equitable way. We have to try to combat it in a way that means that people on low incomes aren't disproportionately hit.
But road pricing by definition
that requires leadership.
It's fine talking about leadership. Let's take a policy of road pricing. Road pricing, literally, it's what it is, literally says the policy will work by preventing you on lower incomes from
that may
driving,
be bad policy.
but continuing to allow those on higher incomes.
Let me just quickly finish my point.
That's literally how it works.
Let me just finish my point. That may be bad policy. That's why I say it's got to be properly thought through. The way to net zero has to be thought about. But on gambling, who's making the money out of gambling? The rich. The rich are making that.
Coming up, thank you so much indeed. Coming up later is the survivor born into a famous cult. We hear how she escaped and how she turned her life around. But now it's the weather.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Good looking day out there today. It's a bit chilly out there first thing this morning. Tomorrow it's going to turn windier and particularly in the west, quite a lot wetter. It's not completely dry this morning. One or two showers just grazing eastern England and across the Northern Isles, where it's still quite blustery too. But the winds will ease down a little through the day and the showers in the east should clear. For the vast majority, it is fine. Dry, bright, with some sunshine, albeit that sunshine turning hazy for Wales and Northern Ireland, with some rain coming into Northern Ireland later on. Temperatures recovering after that chilly start by this afternoon into the teens, maybe the high teens in the south. The wet weather, though, will push into Northern Ireland and then into parts of Scotland during this evening and then into Wales as well, and likely to linger in parts of the west through the night and indeed for much of Sunday. The rain doesn't really get into the Midlands or southern parts of England, generally staying dry here. And it won't be as cold tonight as the night just gone because there's more cloud and the winds will be picking up. So Sunday sees further rain at times, parts of northwest England and especially parts of Scotland looking soggy, where we do have Met Office yellow warnings in place, but also parts of North Wales, Northern Ireland could see pretty heavy and persistent rain for most of tomorrow afternoon. Patchy rain further south, and many central and eastern parts will again just be dry and bright tomorrow. It will be windier, but it's also going to be warmer with temperatures in the high teens or maybe 20 degrees.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to Saturday Morning Live with Esther and Phil. Now the party conference season kicks off and it's the Lib Dems at the moment, just starting there. So we're going to speak to former leader of the Lib Dems, Vince Cable, and ask him what's the highlight, if there are any.
Earlier this week, we had the Bank of England freezing interest rates for the first time in quite a while. We'll be speaking to economist Roger Gewolb about, is this now the peak of interest rates? Have we hit the peak? And also, Jeremy Hunt said it's virtually impossible to cut taxes at the moment. We'll be asking him whether he agrees with the Chancellor.
And we'll be speaking to a lady that we'll call a survivor. She was born into the Children of God cult and there for 22 years. So what does it take to break free, escape and get on with your life? She's going to tell us all about it.
And as ever, lots going on in the royal family. Charles and Camilla have had their successful state visit to France. And also, we've just learned today that Harry snubbed Charles's request to stay with him on the anniversary of the Queen's death. We'll be catching up with all of that royal gossip with Charles Ray, the former royal correspondent for The Sun. And of course, we want to hear what you think about those and anything else that might be on your mind. Email us gbviews@gbnews.com. Before all of that, here's the news headlines with Aaron.
It's 1 minute past 11. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Russell Brand's broken his silence by accusing the government of working with big tech to censor his online content. In a video released last night, the comedian thanked his supporters after what he described as an extraordinary and distressing week. He claims moves to demonetise his social media content occurred, in his words, in the context of the Online Safety Bill, which has not yet been passed. It comes after allegations of sexual assault were made against him following a joint investigation by Channel 4, The Times and The Sunday Times, claims Mr Brand has denied. Boris Johnson's warned Rishi Sunak against delivering a mutilated version of HS2. The former Prime Minister says suggestions the high-speed rail link could be curtailed over cost were the height of insanity and desperate Treasury-driven nonsense. Well, the government's refused to deny reports claiming the Birmingham to Manchester route will be scrapped. David Cameron's also raised concerns, according to reports in The Times, which claims the planned line to East Midlands Parkway could also be under threat. Shadow Secretary for State Annalise Dodds says the country needs clarity.
This was a major plank of the government's claims around levelling up. There's been speculation, in fact, over the last 13 years, including just the last few days around these projects. That's not the way to be delivering that kind of infrastructure. And Labour would have a very different approach. We would make sure not only that we sped up infrastructure projects, but that we then didn't have this kind of speculation and instability, because it's causing huge, huge issues for our country's reputation.
Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak's considering plans that would effectively ban cigarettes for the next generation. It would entail steadily increasing the legal age for consuming tobacco, as reported in The Guardian. If implemented by 2026, it would mean anyone aged 15 and under now would never be able to buy a cigarette. Smoking costs society some £17 billion every year, according to government research, with £2.4 billion of that going to the NHS alone. Ministers are also understood to be drawing up plans to ban disposable vapes. Humans could lose control of machines because artificial intelligence is developing too fast for regulators to keep up. That's the view of the Deputy Prime Minister, who urged world leaders to recognise the threat of AI in a speech to the UN General Assembly in New York last night. Oliver Dowden says the government will push to create an international regulatory body when the UK hosts an AI safety summit at Bletchley Park in November in an effort to protect humanity's future.
AI revolution will be a bracing test for the multilateral system to show that it can work together on a question that will define the fate of humanity. Our future, humanity's future, our entire planet's future depends on our ability to do so. That is our challenge, and this is our opportunity to be truly the United Nations.
The Liberal Democrats are set to launch proposals to improve education and ease the cost of childcare. £390 million would fund permanent tutoring groups for pupils who've fallen behind, which they claim would support 1.75 million children. They're also expected to outline new plans to make childcare flexible, affordable and fair at their upcoming conference. Chief Whip Wendy Chamberlain says they're committed to supporting struggling families.
We want to spend the right money on services, and we want to deliver for local communities, but we want to potentially do different things, and that is what differentiates us as a party. And I'm pretty confident there's a number of dividing lines. I think during cost of living crisis, I think people really appreciate that, and I think that's what we have to do as politicians. We are responsible for rebuilding that trust, because nobody else is going to do it.
A study looking at the health impact of COVID-19's found nearly a third of patients have suffered long-term organ damage. According to the findings, abnormalities in the lungs were almost 14 times higher in those who'd had the virus. Abnormal findings involving the brain and kidneys were 3 and 2 times higher, respectively. The extent of the damage, though, was often influenced by the severity of their infection, their age and other diseases in the body. And Joe Biden's announced a new office dedicated solely to tackling gun violence in America. It's the latest move by the US president to prevent mass shootings. He's previously used executive orders to regulate homemade firearms, to tighten background checks and to strengthen mental health programs. The new Office of Gun Violence Prevention will be overseen by Vice President Kamala Harris. This is GB News. On TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker, just say play GB News. That's it. Now back to Esther and Phil.
Thanks, Aaron. Today is the first day of the Liberal Democrats' much-anticipated party conference following a raft of by-election wins earlier this year.
The conference is taking place in Bournemouth and is the party's first in-person autumn conference in 4 years.
Well, we're delighted to say that we're joined now by former leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Vince Cable. So, is the mood buoyant at conference? Have Lib Dems got a spring in their step after those by-election wins? And will the message be to them, prepare for government?
Well, I can't tell you if it's buoyant because I haven't yet arrived. I've just come overnight from Ukraine, actually, so I've lost a night's sleep. But I'm driving down there this morning. There's every reason to be buoyant and optimistic. They've had this succession of good by-election result, very good election with a very effective promotion and targeting, which Roby's done very well. I think there are good expectations that the election comes with got a substantial number of people.
Vince, I just wanted to ask you, there's a war of words going on between Labour and the Lib Dems about the mid-Bedfordshire by-election. The Lib Dems have put out leaflets saying that they are the bookies' favourites. Now, they were the bookies' favourites at the start, but they're no longer. I've been looking at the betting, and I can read it out. I've got it in front of me here. Labour are actually the bookies' favourites to win that by-election. So will the Lib Dems now refrain from putting out leaflets saying that they are the bookies' favourites in that by-election?
Well, I think, as you've suggested, the odds go up and down, don't they? But no, I think the Lib Dem expectation is that there are cases where you have these very large. North Shropshire was a good example where we came from third place after a big election in 2019. So I've been there, and there's a that we can do very well.
Vince, the line's not great. It seems to be cutting in and out a bit, so I think we might leave it there. I should just say, just for completeness, that the betting that I've got in front of me for the mid-Bedfordshire by-election, so that nobody feels left out, Labour 11-8 favourites, the Lib Dems are 2-1 second favourites, the Conservatives are 9-4 third favourites, then the Independent is 33-1, Reform UK are 50-1, the Greens are 100-1, and the Monster Raving Looney Party are 500-1. So that's the official.
Can we see if we can still hear Vince? Because I said it was going in and out. Has he gone, or have we still got him? I wanted to ask a question about whether you would be looking to do a deal with Labour. Are negotiations going on? And I say that because your name was sort of mentioned, I think, in the Times today, talking about confidence and supply agreements. So are you doing that? Are you preparing for some sort of Lib-Lab pact?
No, I think the answer is no and no. There is a tacit understanding in many seats that it makes sense to vote Lib Dem in some and Labour in others. As you've just pointed out, cases where it's not so obvious, like mid-Bed. No, there will be that kind of understanding we had in 1997. But no, I very much negotiations in any way. I'm certainly not involved in any myself.
Vince Cable, you've been great. The sound hasn't been as great, but we've got the gist of everything you were saying. Thank you very much indeed. And I know you've just come back from Ukraine, so we can have a couple of hours sleep before he heads off to the conference. But to look through today's papers, we're delighted to be joined again by former Labour Party advisor Matthew Laza and Conservative commentator Alex Dean. Where are we going first? Go to you,
yeah,
Matthew.
Well, it's sort of coming off the debate you were having earlier about the divide between sort of what the middle classes want and what the working classes want. And, of course, the people who have to navigate that divide most of all are the Labour Party, and particularly Keir Starmer, its leader. So this week is a really interesting...
Why do you have to navigate it?
Because you've got two different voter bases. So you've got the traditional voter base of working class voters, and then the kind of growing voter base of more middle class.
But don't we have now that with the red and blue wall?
Well,
we're both doing
the blue wall. Yeah, the blue wall itself is kind of Lib Dems. In a lot of seats, Labour has to keep both happy. And so, what an interesting development this week, which didn't really get picked up on, was from the Guardian, was that Unite, Labour's biggest union backer, has said that it's rather than giving its spare cash in its political fund directly to the Labour Party, it's going to fund campaigns in constituencies which have got a big industrial base. And you might think they were kind of, for what you might describe, you think, OK, they're going to do it on traditional lefty demands. Well, actually, they're going to do it on demands which you'd also hear from some of what they might call the Tory right wing as well. So they're going to campaign against Labour's policy to stop new oil and gas exploration, for instance, which is something that people like John Redwood on the Tory right would be in agreement with Unite on. So I think that's really interesting about how the divides in politics are going a different way, and how the unions, looking straight to their members and their members' jobs, are maybe opposing the more middle-class Guardianistas in the Labour Party.
It's their money. They're going to deploy it and have the power that they want.
Wouldn't those industrial members be more pleased with what Rishi Sunak's saying on net zero than what Keir Starmer's saying on net zero?
That's the big danger, and that's why I think we need to watch this week what Labour says about boilers. On cars, they won't, because the car manufacturers want certainty on electric vehicles. But on boilers, when you're talking about people in terraced houses having to install heat pumps, that's, again, paying into this big divide.
But about you, Les, as well, cost of driving if you're working class.
Yeah, I've chosen a story that reflects another aspect of what Matthew was talking about, this divide in the Labour Party and where they go next. The Mail reports on page 8, Keir Starmer's desperate scramble to claim he won't reverse Brexit. So he's clearly been trying to signal to people who wanted us to remain in the European Union and would like us to undo the result of the largest vote we ever had, that he's on their side. You know, he's been trying to message them and say, I'll get a better settlement. But the backfire, the backlash on that, is that there are plenty of people he wants to win over in the red wall seats who gave the Tory party, loaned the Tory party their votes, traditional Labour seats, but they were so done with the Labour Party's old position on Brexit, they voted in droves for Boris Johnson in 2019. Those are the people Starmer needs to win back. And they do not like this messaging from Starmer.
Yeah, it was a major faux pas, that, wasn't it? Major faux pas. And people say, oh, he's got to be more careful with his words. No, it's not his words, it's his intentions that we're interested about.
Weirdly, I think the intentions are not to rejoin Europe, but the words were... I used to organise the conference in Montreal that he spoke at, and you can get a bit carried away.
If you'd have been there, he wouldn't have made this mistake.
But it's full of people from different social democratic parties from around the world and throughout Europe, and so obviously he wanted to keep them happy, so he sort of pushed the envelope and showed them a little bit of leg.
I don't think anybody's saying... I'm not aware that anybody's saying that Keir Starmer's going to overtly rejoin the EU or try and rejoin the EU.
Some are, yeah.
And I don't think that's on the cards at all. I think the suspicion is that he'll do it by the back door, so to speak. So, say, for example, we're never going to deviate from EU rules on things. It's like, well, what's the point of having Brexit if whatever the EU do, we're just going to do exactly the same? That's being a member of the EU.
And he's been much clearer. Sorry.
I was going to say, but combined with what he was planning to do with France on the borders and immigration, you've got this feeling of open borders, open immigration, working with Europe, all the things that people didn't want, so we can get in a single market.
I think it's been a tricky 2 weeks for Labour because of this inexactness in some of the messaging. Because actually, on the police force, the key thing on the border police force is to actually have a cross-border sharing of intelligence to combat the gangs. Well, to do it, there are things that aren't happening which should be happening. But what they've given the impression was that they were going to sign up to the EU scheme to relocate people here. So it's inexact messaging.
Burden sharing scheme. Name
will not go down well in the Red Wall.
Do you think, Alex, that the people in the Red Wall are so hacked off with the Conservatives that they're not bothered really what Starmer says on this too much, that they're going to go back to voting Labour because they're frustrated with the Conservatives?
Well, that's the big debate about what the next election will be like. The lead that the Labour Party enjoys in polls is made up not because of some enormous new enthusiasm for Keir Starmer in the country. It's because a huge number of people are saying don't know and are therefore discounted from the results, and don't knows are drawn wildly disproportionately from those who voted Tory in 2019. So if the Conservative Party wants to do well at the next election, it's got a hard but a very objective and identifiable target, which is to win back its own voters. Right? And those are the people that Starmer is trying to appeal to now. He should be careful about this European stuff because he'll turn them off.
Before we go to your story, just a quick answer. Date for the general election?
So I think the smart money is actually on May. I think going on the same day...
next year.
Next year. Going on the same day as the local elections means that you won't have a 40% turnout at which the Tory party would suffer in the polls.
I think that's probably right, but I don't know. There's a little bit of me thinks Rishi will try and hang on so that nothing is going to lose, so that at least he's been Prime Minister for a decent time.
Will Labour be ready for May?
Yes. Look, they're on a war footing, candidates are in place, and we've seen recently the money's been coming in for people like David Sainsbury to fund the campaign.
So there you go, sooner than maybe you thought. Phil, you give us a fun, uplifting story.
Well, I've got sort of...
Is it
a mucky story. We all know now.
Is it mucky, as my mum would have said?
Come on, Matthew, honestly, you've misjudged me. So I've got two for you here. Daily Star, page 23. Sausage, egg, chips, beans and a cuddle. Apparently, cafes are the favourite place for a first date. They want to fall in love over a fry-up and a mug of tea. Is that where you take somebody on a...
I'm available, so if anybody wants to take me on a first date... But what I think is interesting, talking of the working class divide...
Is that the morning after the night before? Is that why they're having...
Because otherwise, isn't there a divide here between the two tribes in politics, the two tribes for dates? Because, of course, quite a lot of cafes that people go to now only serve flat whites and you can't get a bacon sandwich for love nor money.
I thought the big divide was HP or red sauce.
Brown sauce every time.
Brown sauce.
Alex,
red or brown sauce?
Cafe was a Mantis?
So you're describing the kind of cafe I like. I love a greasy spoon.
Yeah, me too.
But first date for me would be in a pub.
We went to Pizza Express, I think, for our first
Yeah, we
date,
did.
didn't we?
Only because it was
royal
the closest place. Only because it was the closest place to Westminster that was open. But red or brown sauce?
Brown.
Brown, yeah, definitely. Brown?
Brown, yeah.
Oh, it's a full house of brown sauces.
Other pizza places are available. And the other one is page 35 of The Sun. This is more for you, Matthew. I didn't want to disappoint you. I was looking... Page 35 of The Sun, Sex on the Brain is the headline.
Now, it's just a self-description of yourself.
All I can say is it is only on the brain. It is only on the brain.
So much information.
This is...
Philip, carry on. The husband who I love.
Perils of having a husband and wife team in live broadcast. Bloody hell.
Apparently, regular romps can help... This is a public health message here, Alex. Regular romps can help stave off dementia. Sex can help protect against dementia by increasing blood flow to the brain, boffins say.
How much? How much is it?
How much you have to have?
Sex?
Yes.
How much? It depends where you go, I think. Is that how much you have to pay?
No, how many times a week do you have to ward off dementia?
Sure, a good-looking guy like you don't have to pay for it.
The jokes are coming now.
Come on. So how many times a week?
Apparently, for 62 to 74-year-olds, the quality of sex and climax was most closely linked to mental sharpness. Over 75s, on the other hand, benefited most from romps at least once a week.
At least once a week.
That's a reasonable target. It's not over the top. I'm not going to ask if you achieve it, because that would be too much
information. That's not impossible. I shan't do a poll. Have you achieved that level this week? But anyway, you at home can check whether you've done it this week and therefore whether you'll stave off dementia.
We'll check out every week whether you've got...
I'm not coming back now. I'm too embarrassed, man.
Well, look, it's been wonderful having you watch it. I will warn you what his stories are before you come on next time. Alex, we will see you soon.
See you soon.
I will ask you those questions off air. Coming up, how do you survive being born into and growing up in a cult? We're joined by Petra Velazbor, who shares her incredible story in just a few moments.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest weather forecast for GB News. We've got a bright day ahead, but it does turn wetter and windier as we move through into the second half of the weekend. So a ridge of high pressure at the moment keeps it settled. However, this large area of low pressure will throw up some bands of heavy rain as we move through into Sunday, some strong winds developing too. But for the rest of the afternoon, it's a dry, bright picture across much of the UK. There will be some sunny spells. The risk of 1 or 2 showers across the far east, and then later on, thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain starting to push into parts of Northern Ireland. Temperatures overall reaching the mid to high teens, so near average for the time of year with generally light winds. However, it does start to go downhill from the west through this evening as bands of heavy rain push into parts of Northern Ireland, western Scotland, western fringes of Wales and southwest England too. This pushing northeastwards through the night, turning heavy at times. Temperatures generally overall holding up, so a warmer night than recently with temperatures 12 to 14 Celsius to take us into Sunday morning. So generally quite cloudy, outbreaks of heavy rain pushing slowly north and eastwards too. Perhaps driest and brightest weather across the far southeast, but even here the risk of some rain at times. The rain turning heavy into the afternoon and evening time further north, with the winds increasing to gales developing through Irish Sea coast and temperatures a little higher.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK
and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Saturday Morning Live with Esther and Phil. It's now 11:25.
Now I want to do,
lots of views
in.
coming in about all sorts, lots and lots about shoplifting.
Absolutely. Sean here, and she said, don't dare blame shoplifting on the cost of living problems. We grew up with very little, but never stole a damn thing. We'd have got a whipping from mum and dad, and rightly so if we ever did.
Anne says something very similar. I'm sick of hearing about some families can't afford this, that or the other, so they steal. No, no, no. I grew up in the 50s and families had it hard then. I mean really hard, and my parents didn't steal. The problem is today it's all about benefits, the do-gooders, and the government have made people extremely lazy.
Yeah, because we were talking about the rocketing shoplifting numbers, and some people were saying, oh, is it desperate families needing it, or is it criminals using the cost of living as an excuse? And everybody is like, no, they are criminals using it as an excuse. So we're going to move on to something completely different. So how do you rebuild your life after you've been born into one of the world's most religious cults?
The cult, formerly known as the Children of God, was all our next guest knew for the first 22 years of her life.
Petra Velzebor is now a renowned mental health advocate, and we're delighted to say she joins us now. So this is an incredible story. Well, it is to me. I was reading it, couldn't believe it. You were born into the cult, so it was your parents who were there. They went in. You were there for 22 years, and then you broke free. So first of all, before you tell us how you managed to break free, what was it like living there? You know, whenever I've watched movies, it seems it's like free love. It seems it's all very wacky, very controlling, very absurd. What was it like?
Well, thank you for having me. I love coming on your show. Well, first of all, it's usually a mixed bag. So people in those documentaries, you see the end result, right, of coercive control. You see the suicide groups or things like that. But for me, there were some good bits. Like if you think of communal living, I'm one of 5 siblings. We grew up with lots of music, lots of people, lots of travel. But of course, it was over time. If you're born into it, that's all you know, right? So that's your normal. And it was over time that I began to notice the more controlling elements, how religion was used as a form of control. There was free love back in the day. I mean, it started in the 70s.
Control you to do what, though? Control you to do what?
So I think it doesn't feel like control when you're in it. And in my book, I talk a lot about how corporates are similar in a way, right? You don't really realize what's toxic behavior, but we were scheduled. Like every moment was scheduled. You would wake up early. You were often in groups with kids your age, so not with your kind of family unit. And I guess, you know, our mission was to tell others about God and to tell others about the way to live. But we didn't go to school as kids. You know, it was all about working within the community. And I guess the mission that drew my parents and others of their generation to it was they didn't want to sit in church buildings. They wanted to go out and do good. Sounds great, right? But it was over time that kind of sexualized environment, not going to school, not having any other choices. And of course, we thought the world was going to end.
Did you have a happy childhood?
I feel like parts of it were, but it took me a good long while to be able to separate out kind of what were the bad bits and what were the good bits. Because if you're a child, again, that's your normal, and it can get very confusing and affect your mental health in a big way.
So, because this is all you ever knew, right. I want to know, how did you know that you wanted to escape? What was it that made you think, this isn't for me?
I think it was very gradual, right? It's noticing different things that maybe weren't quite right. But you learn to rationalize that, oh, that person wasn't right, not the belief system, right? And that's what keeps you in it for so long. But for me, as I became a teenager, I started leading a double life. We had a few more freedoms. The founder had passed on. There was other leadership. And on the one hand, I was actually trusted and became a leader myself. But on the other hand...
Oh, you must be quite duplicitous and sneaky.
It's called survival, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
So you're like, how do I survive when you can't quite figure out what's good and what's not so good? But on the other hand, one of my sisters had left. I would stay with her. I had certain freedoms. And I began to sink into alcohol addiction, hedonistic lifestyles, just real double lives. But people can kind of relate to wearing a mask in order to survive, right? Mm-hmm. Over time, the cracks begin to show.
Just on this point, Esther said, how did you escape? Do you have to escape? I mean, is pressure put on you to stay? Or, I mean, are you sort of, is the doors open and you're free to leave?
You're free to leave. It's not prison, right? And I sometimes talk about, you know, the Shawshank Redemption movie, where there's this whole kind of build-up to his escape, right? And he digs a tunnel, and there's this big scene where there's music and rain, and he's now free, right? And that's what people think escaping looks like. It's not like that. There are no walls. It's all up here in your mind. The guilt.
They've done a better job of entrapment, haven't they? But you fell in love and you ended up getting pregnant. How did you fall in love? Was this person in the cult too?
Outside of the cult, and that was part of the double life. Was we were kind of dating and partying, and it was all very duplicitous, you know.
Did nobody find out or snitch on you or anything?
Well, I was quite good at it, I must say. And so, of course, when I felt pregnant, then it's like at some point questions are asked, right? And it wasn't just questions being asked. It was a culmination of many years of me going, but what else would I do? Remember, I don't have an education. What does this mean if I'm not on this joint mission of what we are supposed to do?
Before we just mention your book, were you ever angry with your parents? To say, what have you brought me into?
Well, I think you go through all the stages of grief, as it were. So denial, anger, depression, you go through all of those things. And actually, it's when you leave that sometimes the worst mental health cycles show up. So that's when my addiction got worse, depression, anxiety, suicidal thinking, right? It was afterwards, because then I was like, isolated and alone and thinking, who am I?
And you've written this book, Begin With You. Yeah. And if anybody is mentally strong and been through many things, it is you. So what are you saying in this book?
So there's a bit more of my story, so if you're curious, do check it out. But my mission and my business now is all about mental health in the workplace. So it's helping people think about the toxicity that often shows up in the corporate world, and learning to, I mean, the title is Begin With You, because it's thinking you can either be stuck in a victim mindset, right, and just blame your past, and certainly I sat there for many years, right, or eventually you can make certain decisions to strengthen your mind and get yourself, so start with you, move yourself out of it. And of course, once that worked, I thought I've got to tell other people about it, and that's the book.
Petra, I think it sounds amazing. And you've got such, well, I feel it, a sunny disposition now. Been through a lot, but you're out the other side. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, we'll be speaking to royal commentator Charles Ray as he gives his verdict on King Charles's state visit to France. But first, here's the news with Aaron.
It's 11:32. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson's warned Rishi Sunak against delivering a mutilated version of HS2. The former Prime Minister says suggestions the high-speed rail link could be curtailed over cost were the height of insanity and Treasury-driven nonsense. The government's refused to deny reports claiming the Birmingham to Manchester leg will be scrapped. David Cameron's also raised concerns, according to reports in The Times, which claims the planned line to East Midlands Parkway could also be under threat. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak's considering plans that would effectively ban cigarettes for the next generation. It would entail steadily increasing the legal age, as reported in The Guardian. If implemented by 2026, it would mean anyone aged 15 and under now would never be able to buy a cigarette. Smoking costs society some £17 billion a year, according to government research, with £2.4 billion of that going to the NHS alone. The Liberal Democrats are set to launch proposals to improve education and ease the cost of childcare. £390 million would fund permanent tutoring groups for pupils who've fallen behind, which they claim would support 1.75 million children. They're also expected to outline new plans to make childcare flexible, affordable and fair at their upcoming conference. And Russell Brand's attacked the media in a new online post. He lashed out at the government, big tech companies and media organisations, suggesting moves to demonetise social media content, his content, comes in the context of the Online Safety Bill, which Mr Brand claims has been passed into law. It hasn't. He also made remarks concerning free speech, the deep state and collusion, before asking people to follow him on Rumble. Mr Brand earns significant revenue from the platform. He chose not to address the allegations made against him of rape, sexual assault and emotional abuse, and he denies any wrongdoing. More on all of our stories on our website at gbnews.com. I'll be back with more news in just under half an hour's time.
Thanks, Aaron. Now, the Bank of England has raised their rates 14 times in a row in a battle to control inflation, but the bank has now decided to place a hold on those increases.
The rate of inflation fell to 6.7% in August, down from 6.8% in July, which means overall prices are still rising, but the rate of increase is falling. Joining us now to discuss this is Dr Roger Gewald, former Bank of England and UK Treasury advisor. Roger, thanks for joining us. I know that you've been calling on the Bank of England to stop these interest rate rises for quite some time. Do you think we've now reached the peak of interest rates in the UK? Can mortgage holders breathe a sigh of relief and say, that's it, we've reached the peak, it's going to be downwards from now on?
Well, I think it's very interesting. Good morning, by the way. I think it's very interesting that the previous segment you did was the lady who escaped that cult, because I'm hoping that Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, has escaped the cult of raising interest rates as often as he can. Whether that's a permanent thing or not, I don't know, but certainly it's breathed a sigh of relief on this lovely sunny weekend into the country. That means that people's mortgages, as you say, will not go up again. And equally as importantly, the rental market will not suffer further. It's been worse than the mortgage market, with rents rising like skyrockets. And of course, businesses will see their borrowings level off for now. And I simply hope that they don't need to raise it again. I've been against it from the start. It's kind of like being happy that a serial killer only murdered 6 people, you know. It never should have happened, and I hope it stops.
Roger, what do you think the government's priority should be for the economy now? There's a big debate at the moment about whether taxes should come down or whether they should stay where they are. Jeremy Hunt says that tax cuts are virtually impossible at the moment. Do you agree with him about that, or do you think that taxes do need to be cut?
It depends on what tax one is talking about. I think it's very clever, and as with quite a lot from Mr. Hunt and the government, what one sees is that the rates don't actually go up, but there are what they call stealth taxes, where they increase the net, so more people fall into tax. So yeah, he's not going to cut the rate, but he certainly could roll back on some of the stealth tax measures that he put in place, which has increased the government's tax take tremendously. He could also cut VAT across the board for 6 or 12 months. He certainly could do something about petrol duty and diesel duty, where the tax take by the government is ridiculous. It's actually a triple tax. So there are a lot of areas where indeed they could cut. They claim that the government debt is so high, et cetera, but if you remember back, only a few months ago, when Jeremy Hunt introduced all those stealth taxes because of the 55 billion pound black hole, 3 days after that, the black hole didn't exist anymore. So, yeah, I think there's room for some tax cuts.
OK, now, all good news so far, some of the things that we're hearing, but I do hear there could be risks ahead. Businesses are looking at a possible recession there, as it's the highest rate of them getting rid of the staff at the moment. So what do we need to be cautious of, aware of?
Well, I think more than the dangers of recession for business, which simply means a slowdown in their business, Esther, many think tanks have predicted many tens of thousands of bankruptcies, of insolvencies for business after these 14 rate cuts. That's what we really have to watch out for, is that the huge burden of interest on British business from these 14 tax cuts doesn't sink a huge chunk of it. It's so bad that a little known fact is that the Bank of England actually ran out of money. It lost 30 billion in the last 11 months and had to be bailed out in July by the Treasury, when before these interest rate rises, it was making effectively a profit.
Roger, thank you ever so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on. We appreciate your insight.
He went quickly.
He did, didn't he?
But look, coming up, we'll be speaking to royal commentator Charles Ray as he gives his verdict on King Charles's state visit to France. You won't want to miss that.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Saturday Morning Live with Esther and Phil. It's now 11:43. But it's been a busy royal week as King Charles and Queen Camilla made their first official visit to France. So who better to join us now other than royal correspondent, former royal correspondent at The Sun, Charles Ray. Wonderful for you to join us. So, all intents and purposes, it was a great visit for Charles and Camilla to France. But people are questioning, does he need to be so political? Should he be talking about climate change?
Well, good morning. I would say that the visit itself was highly successful, and I think when they do the debriefing, they'll all be patting themselves on the back and say it's wonderful. And in the main, it was. You couldn't fault it. It was great pictures, great chats with Macron and Brigitte and all that sort of stuff. The ping pong was marvellous. I'm glad to see that Camilla let her win. That's good diplomat. But we've got again Charles banging on, which he has done, to be fair to him, for the last 40 years about climate change. Now, this all comes about on the day that Sunak himself, as you well know, was rowing back on his net zero policies, and you would have thought that the script writers or the speech writers for Charles would look at it and say, well, hang on a minute, maybe we should just temper it a little bit. But no, he comes out all guns blazing, which is size 10 feet in it, and starts banging on about climate change, which is a bit, you know, when people like you, me, and the viewers and the listeners are sitting back and are listening to people tell us how we should live our lives, and yet they fly off from London to Paris, watch a fly past, and fly back again. It's a bit galling, you know. It's another case of don't do as I do, just do as you're told scenario. So apart from that, I think it was a highly successful visit.
I mean, because, you know, I'm a monarchist, I'm a royalist, I want them to succeed, but I felt, no, stay out of the politics. And I've got to ask you about this. Front page here of The Sun, your former paper, it says, Harry snubs Charles. He had an offer there to go to Balmoral to be with them on the anniversary of Queen Elizabeth II's death, and he snubbed his dad.
And Esther, Phil, this just shows how churlish that young man has become, Harry. Here is his father. Now, Charles has been criticised over the last few weeks about not doing enough to send out the olive branch and everything else. Well, here he has. He sent out a huge, great big olive branch, and Harry has snapped it in half. He's flown more than 5,000 miles to Britain to attend a fabulous charity, and his dad says, you come up here, because that's where the royals are. And Harry knows where they are. It's not as if it's a big surprise that, they've deserted London and they're going up to Balmoral. But come up for the day, and Harry could have done that. But no, he chose instead to, you know, go and pay his respects on his own, which he's entitled to do. But he keeps on banging on about the royal family and them not coming back and saying hello. You know, Charles is king, yeah, but he's also a loving father. Make no doubt about that. Charles loves his boys equally. There is no question about it. Always has done. Maybe not always shown it, but he always has done. And I think Harry is learning a big lesson on this now.
Charles, just finally, Esther mentioned your former paper, The Sun. We've heard the news this week about Rupert Murdoch becoming the emeritus chairman of the company that you used to work for. I just wondered, have you got any memories of Rupert Murdoch when you were working at The Sun? Was he very hands-on there, or did he let you get on with it?
Yes, he was very hands-on. I mean, he was always, you know, especially with the editors, he wasn't hands-on with the grunts like me and everything else. He was always around and everything else. And you know, he wants saying he's resigned and everything else. No, he hasn't. He's just shifted. He's still going to be making those phone calls. He's still going to be putting fear into any executive who picks up that phone. I mean, he's a great man. He produced great papers. You know, when I worked there, I'm not trying to be clever, we were producing The Sun, 4.8 million people at night. That's 12 to 15 million people in Britain were reading it. Now, lots of people will say, oh, it's a great shame and everything else. But it is a great paper still. And Rupert will still be involved, even though he's now still 92.
Charles Ray, just a quick answer. Does he like the royal family? Is he a royalist?
I think he can take it or leave it. I mean, he does like the royal family, but he's not slavishly towards the royal family. So yeah, no, he's look. Rupert treats everybody exactly the same. You well know in politics.
Yeah,
he's let the win.
Charles Ray, superstar as always. Brilliant. Thanks for having you on there. Equally, we did a poll a little bit earlier. Should the king be making political speeches? Should he have made them about climate change? 14% of you said yes, but a whopping 86% of you said no, they shouldn't. He shouldn't, sorry. Well, we're delighted to be joined in the studio again by sports broadcaster Aidan McGee and showbiz journalist Hayley Palmer. Great to have you with us. So come on, Hayley, give us your top story. Kylie Minogue.
Yes, I love this. She has a comeback album called Tension, and the critics are saying it's the best thing that she's done. And I just think it's brilliant because sometimes stars from the 80s or 90s, they have all these great hits, but then nowadays they're not quite as good. But she's absolutely smashed it. She's got a pop-up shop in Regent Street this week that you can go along to. It's on for 3 days. And also, you can tune into my show, shameless plug, because I'm having a Stock Aitken and Waterman countdown tonight with lots of Kylie on there to celebrate.
There should be lots of Bananarama. Bananarama was far better than Kylie.
Oh, that's a bold statement.
She went to my school, the lead singer.
It's true, though.
Now, the pop-up shops, is Kylie going to be there, or is it just about her?
I've been watching in the press and she has made appearances, but I don't think she's there like all day with a packed lunch, but I think she is popping in and out.
I'd be fun if she was. Not quite as, I don't know, celebrity showbiz and glamorous with a packed lunch.
Premier League. We had Harry on earlier saying that he thought in his heart of hearts, if he had to have his life on it, he suspects Arsenal are going to beat his beloved Spurs. What do you think?
It's going to be a great game. You know,
they're both in good form, aren't they?
Yeah, they are in good form. The problem is that Spurs I know it's not far away, it's only 3 miles away from where they reside, but they just don't travel well to the Emirates. I think they won there once in 2010 since Arsenal moved there in 2006. Prior to that, they hadn't won at Highbury since 1993. As an away fixture, it's not a happy hunting ground for Tottenham at all. I expect Arsenal to take it, not by a lot, because Spurs are no mugs, but I expect them to take it by 2-1. You can come back to me on that prediction next week, because that's my crystal ball telling me that 2-1 to Arsenal.
That's usually wrong.
Bobby Brazier sounds like a footballer, but he's not. It's Jade Goody's son.
That's right,
but he's in Strictly.
I've never heard of him.
But you've heard of Jade Goody?
I've heard of Jade Goody. Bobby Brazier?
Yes.
Never heard of him.
But I can't believe...
Has anyone ever heard of him?
As old as he is, I can't believe...
Have you heard of him?
Firstly, I'd like to give you some facts on Bobby Brazier. He won an NTA award.
Did he?
And he's
one of the stars of... That's not important to do, though, is it?
Yes, it's massively important. And he's on Strictly Tonight doing the Foxtrot.
Is he?
And he's Jeff Brazier's son as well. He's the biggest, not the biggest star, but he's the most upcoming star at the moment,
Really?
I would say.
But I'm allowed to be out of touch. I'm
you are.
But all I'm saying is, you remember Jade Goody, don't you?
I do remember Jade Goody, yeah.
And when I saw her son, actually... No, but what I'm saying, I just couldn't believe he was as old as he was. I just thought it was only a few years ago that she was on Big Brother, and here's her kid.
Yes.
And he's been a model. He's a good-looking lad. I was impressed.
He really is. And the story behind that is apparently he was getting suspended from school. So he was in Costa Coffee with his dad, Jeff, and his dad was giving him a stern talking to. And apparently a model agent actually came up to him in Costa Coffee as he was getting suspended from school. So there we go.
What's the moral of the story?
I don't really know.
I'll tell you what it was. No, I don't think it was. I think the fact that his dad was giving him down the banks, you need to get a grip, sort out your life. I think they thought, oh, well, sensible father.
But sometimes...
Sensible father.
Sometimes school's not for everyone, and he's obviously blossoming. He's in Strictly, he's very creative, he's a great actor, so...
Just quickly, Rugby World Cup.
England in action this afternoon, 4:45 against Chile. They've made 12 changes. The hard work's done, I think. They're going to get through the pool stages. I think England will be dangerous in the knockouts, but Australia in action tomorrow. Ireland against South Africa today, the two best teams in the world as things stand. Opportunity there for Ireland to get a statement victory to prove that they are the best side in the world. The problem is they go to these tournaments, Phil, and they flatter to deceive. They're a bit like New Zealand were 20 years ago, even France now. They go to the big events and they promise a lot but fail to deliver. But this is the time for Ireland, I would say. If they can get a win today, actually the loser could face France without Antoine Dupont, who's got a cheekbone problem, and he's the top player in the tournament, I would suggest. So that would weaken France significantly. But as for England, get into the knockout stages, who knows?
Aidan, Hayley, thank you very much indeed. It's almost the end of the show. But up next, it's GB News Saturday with the marvellous Martin Daubney. So, Martin, what's on the show today?
Well, today is the Rejoin EU march in London. And in the interest of journalistic integrity, we're going to go along and find out why you're so obsessed with rejoining the EU. And more to the point, is Keir Starmer your man? Because don't forget, this week he said we don't want to diverge from the EU. So we're going to ask this lot, why do you want to get back in? And is Keir your man? Plus, at 2 p.m, we've got the big battle of Brexit. Anne Widdecombe, the battle axe of Brexit. Good pal of mine, taking on the leader of this mob, I think could be the biggest, most one-sided contest since King Canute took on the time.
The interesting thing about the rejoin thing, though, is that all the polls, we keep being told that more and more people are now against Brexit and wish we'd stayed in the EU. Yeah. And yet the Labour Party are now saying, no, we're not going to rejoin. The Lib Dems are even saying, we don't want to rejoin. I think it's just the Green Party left who are saying, we want to rejoin.
Well, they're saying that, and this is the big slip of the week. They're all saying, oh, no, we don't Brexiteers, come with us, it's fine. But really, we found out what Keir Starmer thought, didn't we? He didn't want any divergence, wants to be in Europe via the back door.
Well, it's about trust and it's about believability. Do you trust Starmer? The guy's had more positions than the Kama Sutra on Brexit, as far as I'm concerned.
Aidan laughed at that one. Aidan with a right mucky laugh, if you don't mind me saying.
So what I'm saying is, what's the truth? Plus, of course, HS2, has Rishi got his mojo back? He's blasted this petrol car ban. People like it. It's landed well with Tory voters. The HS2 thing, I think, will go well too. I campaigned against it, and I think it's going to be a great show.
Martin, we can't wait to see it. Yeah. Thank you so much, and we'll see you all next week at 10 a.m. on Saturday.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest weather forecast for GB News. We've got a bright day ahead, but it does turn wetter and windier as we move through into the second half of the weekend. So a ridge of high pressure at the moment keeps it settled. However, this large area of low pressure will throw up some bands of heavy rain as we move through into Sunday, some strong winds developing too. But for the rest of the afternoon, it's a dry, bright picture across much of the UK. There will be some sunny spells. The risk of 1 or 2 showers across